Welcome, dear friends, to this journey into one of the most powerful and enduring stories ever told, the tragedy of Oedipus. Across centuries, poets, philosophers, and storytellers have returned to this myth, not only for its dramatic twists, but also for the deep questions it raises about destiny, truth, and the human spirit. In this video, we invite you to step into the ancient world of Thebes, where kings and queens struggle against forces larger than themselves, where choices lead to unforeseen consequences, and where fate and free will collide in ways both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. This is not simply a tale of a king. It is a mirror into human nature, exploring pride, blindness, guilt, and the relentless search for truth. Through 40 carefully crafted chapters, you will witness Oedipus's rise, his relentless quest for answers, and the tragic unraveling of the mystery that seals his fate. Stay with us as we bring this ancient myth to life, with vivid storytelling, dramatic characters, and striking imagery. By the end, you may find yourself asking how much of our lives is truly our own and how much has already been written in the stars. Long ago, in the powerful city of Thebes, King Laius and Queen Jocasta sought the wisdom of Apollo's oracle at Delphi. Their kingdom was prosperous, their rule firm, yet the shadow of uncertainty lay heavy upon them. For no dynasty, however strong, can escape the questions of the future. They traveled to Delphi, carrying gifts and sacrifices, hoping for guidance and blessing. But what they received was not comfort, it was terror. The priestess of Apollo, in her trance, spoke a chilling prophecy. The son born of Laius and Jocasta would bring ruin. He would rise against his father, slay him, and claim his own mother as his bride. Horror gripped the royal hearts. They returned to Thebes trembling, their joy of parenthood poisoned by dread. How could such a thing be? How could the gods decree such cruelty? Yet the words of Apollo could not be dismissed. For in ancient Greece, the will of the gods was law, and even kings bowed before fate. Thus, even before Oedipus was born, his life was bound to tragedy. A prophecy had been spoken, and a story of blood and sorrow had begun. Not long after, a child was born to Laius and Jocasta, a boy, their only son. In another life, his birth would have been cause for celebration, a promise of legacy and strength. But here, the shadow of prophecy hung over the cradle. The king's heart hardened, though Jocasta's love urged her to hold the infant close. Laius decreed that the child must not live. The prophecy could not be allowed to unfold. He commanded a servant to take the baby away, to pierce his tiny ankles with iron, and leave him upon a desolate mountainside. The infant wailed, innocent yet marked by destiny. His ankles, swollen from cruel bonds, would earn him the name Oedipus, swollen foot. Jocasta wept silently, torn between maternal love and obedience to her king. The servant, though loyal, trembled with guilt. For to abandon a child was not only a crime against nature, but a sin against the gods. Thus, before Oedipus could even open his eyes to the world, his parents had turned against him, their love drowned in fear, and the wheels of fate turned ever forward, unstoppable. Merciless, the servant obeyed his king, carrying the infant into the wilderness. The mountains stood silent, their peaks veiled in mist, as the shepherd approached the place where he was to leave the child. Oedipus's cries pierced the stillness of the wild, a fragile sound against the immensity of fate. The servant's hands shook. Could he truly let innocence perish? Though bound by duty, his heart ached with pity, and in that moment of struggle, mercy overcame fear. He could not kill the child. Instead, he sought another way. Far from Thebes, he encountered a wandering shepherd from Corinth. Desperate to be rid of his burden, the Theban servant entrusted the infant to this stranger, hoping destiny might be fooled. The Corinthian shepherd, moved by compassion, agreed to carry the boy to his homeland. Thus, Oedipus was spared, but not freed, for though mercy had saved his life, fate was not so easily escaped. The prophecy lingered, unseen, waiting for its appointed hour. And so the child, abandoned yet preserved, passed from hand to hand, carried further along the path the gods had chosen for him. The shepherd from Corinth carried the infant back to his city, where destiny awaited him in a different guise. There, King Polybus and Queen Merope ruled with wisdom and longing, for they had no child of their own. When the shepherd presented the abandoned baby, they saw not misfortune but blessing. Polybus, touched by the gift of the gods, claimed the boy as his son. Merope, moved by a mother's yearning, pressed the child to her breast with joy. They named him Oedipus, never knowing the meaning of the wounds upon his feet. And so the boy grew in Corinth, not as a castaway, but as a prince. He learned the ways of kingship, the arts of leadership, and the values of honor. To him, Polybus and Merope were his true parents. He lived in comfort and safety, shielded from the dark truth of his birth. Yet beneath this seeming fortune lay the silent hand of fate. For though Oedipus was raised in royal halls, the prophecy remained unbroken, waiting like a shadow at the edge of his life. Years passed, and Oedipus grew into a strong and intelligent young man. In Corinth, he was loved as the heir to the throne. Yet as he walked among the people, whispers followed him. Some claimed his features were not those of Polybus. Others murmured that his birth was shrouded in mystery. At first, Oedipus dismissed such talk. But doubts, once sown, grow like weeds in the heart. His pride urged him to seek the truth of his origin. For though he loved Polybus and Merope dearly, something within him longed for certainty. One night, during a banquet, a drunken man mocked him, saying he was not the true son of Polybus. Rage burned in Oedipus, but also fear. Could it be true? Was he not who he believed himself to be? Conflicted, he turned to Merope and Polybus. They reassured him with love, but evaded his questions. Their silence was louder than words, and Oedipus felt the weight of secrets pressing upon his life. Thus began his restless search, a hunger for truth that would drive him from Corinth and into the jaws of destiny. Haunted by whispers of his uncertain birth, Oedipus resolved to uncover the truth. He traveled to Delphi, the sacred seat of Apollo, where mortals sought answers beyond human reach. With offerings in hand, he entered the temple, his heart torn between fear and hope. But the oracle gave him no comfort. Instead, she spoke a prophecy darker than any nightmare. You are destined to kill your father and to wed your mother. The words struck him like thunder. Oedipus staggered back, disbelief warring with terror. Kill Polybus? Marry Merope? The very thought was unbearable, monstrous. Yet the oracle's voice carried the weight of eternity. Oedipus left Delphi shaken to his core. He vowed that he would not return to Corinth, that he would never endanger those he loved. He would defy destiny by fleeing it. In his heart burned a desperate hope, that by walking away, he might outwit the will of the gods. But fate, ever patient, had already set the path beneath his feet. With the oracle's words burning in his soul, Oedipus made a fateful decision. He would never return to Corinth, never see Polybus and Merope again. If leaving meant saving them from his cursed destiny, then exile was his only choice. He walked the winding roads of Greece alone, each step heavy with sorrow. Though he believed he was protecting his parents, he was walking further into the very prophecy he sought to escape. The mountains loomed, the valleys stretched before him, and each night the stars shone cold and distant, silent witnesses to his struggle. As he journeyed, Oedipus's pride and determination grew. He would be his own master. He would not bend to prophecy. His heart swore that no god, no oracle, no fate would dictate the path of his life. And yet, in that very defiance lay the seeds of tragedy. The road from Corinth was not a path of freedom. It was the road to Thebes, to the place where fate waited with open arms. It was at a narrow crossroads, where three paths converged, that fate tightened its grip upon Oedipus. On the road ahead, a royal chariot approached, driven by King Laius of Thebes, who was traveling with his attendants. Neither father nor son knew the other's face. The path was narrow, and pride flared quickly. Laius's herald demanded Oedipus step aside for the king, but Oedipus, weary and proud, refused. Harsh words became shouts, shouts turned to blows, and in the dust of the road, steel was drawn. In a violent struggle, Oedipus struck down Laius, unaware that he had slain his own father. The attendants fled, or were slain as well, leaving the young traveler standing over blood he never wished to spill. Breathing heavily, Oedipus wiped his brow, thinking himself the victor of chance, never knowing he had fulfilled the first half of Apollo's dreadful prophecy. Never, not far from Thebes, a monstrous terror awaited. The Sphinx, a creature with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman, had been tormenting the city. She devoured any who failed to answer her riddle, and the roads ran red with the blood of the unwise. When Oedipus arrived, he found the city in despair. The Sphinx blocked the gates, and none dared face her. But Oedipus, bold and unyielding, stepped forward. The Sphinx asked her riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Oedipus thought deeply, then answered with calm certainty, man. As an infant, he crawls on all 4s. In his strength, he walks on 2. In old age, he leans on a staff as a 3rd. The Sphinx shrieked in defeat. Her riddle broken, her power destroyed, she cast herself from the cliffs. Thebes rejoiced, hailing Oedipus as their savior, for he had rid them of a terror none had overcome. Thus, by wit and courage, Oedipus entered Thebes as a hero. As a hero, Thebes erupted in celebration. The monster was gone, and the city was free at last. The people hailed Oedipus as a deliverer, a man blessed by the gods with wisdom and courage. No longer a wandering stranger, he was lifted high by the cheers of a grateful people. The throne of Thebes had been left empty after Laius's death, and the city sought a strong hand to guide them. Who better than the man who had solved the riddle and saved their lives? In triumph, Oedipus was crowned king. As part of his reward, he was given the hand of the widowed queen, Jocasta. She was wise, noble, and fair, and in her, Oedipus found both love and power. Together they ruled Thebes in strength and prosperity. The prophecy seemed forgotten, buried under the joy of victory. Yet the truth remained hidden, waiting to rise. For in Jocasta's embrace, Oedipus unknowingly clasped the arms of his own mother, and in his coronation lay the shadow of doom. The city of Thebes had crowned its new savior. Oedipus, triumphant after solving the riddle of the Sphinx, was offered the highest honor the people could bestow, the throne of their fallen king, and with it came the hand of Queen Jocasta, widow of Laius. At first, Oedipus hesitated. He was a foreigner, a wanderer, with no claim to Thebes. Yet the people pressed upon him, crying that he was chosen by the gods. Jocasta herself, regal and gracious, extended her hand, sealing their union. Oedipus accepted, and in that moment his fate was bound tighter than ever. He had married not only the queen of Thebes, but also, unknowingly, his own mother. From their union sprang children, sons and daughters who would inherit both his strength and his curse. For a time, the city flourished. Thebes knew peace under Oedipus's rule. The people adored him, and Jocasta brought balance and wisdom to his reign. It seemed as if fate had been defeated, that tragedy had been silenced. But beneath the surface, the prophecy remained alive, waiting, patient. For the day it would reveal itself. Years passed, and Thebes prospered under Oedipus's reign. Yet the gods, who never forget, soon struck the city with a terrible curse. A plague spread across the land, bringing death to men, women, and children alike. Crops withered in the fields, livestock perished, and the once thriving city fell into despair. The people cried out for deliverance. They gathered before their king, begging him to save them as he once saved them from the Sphinx. Oedipus, deeply moved, swore he would not rest until the plague was ended. His pride as king, his love for his people, and his defiance of fate all bound him to this vow. Thebes became a city of mourning. Funerals filled the streets, incense burned in the temples, and prayers rose unanswered into the heavens. Yet still the people clung to Oedipus, their savior, trusting he would find a way. But what they did not know was that the very man they looked to for salvation was the cause of their suffering. For the gods had cursed Thebes until the blood guilt of Laius's murder was revealed. In his desperation to save Thebes, Oedipus sent Creon, his brother-in-law, to the oracle at Delphi. After days of waiting, Creon returned with grim news. The voice of Apollo had spoken. The plague would not lift until the murderer of King Laius was found and punished. The revelation spread like fire through Thebes. Whispers filled the streets. Who had killed Laius? Why had the crime remained unsolved? Oedipus, filled with righteous anger, declared before all the people that he would hunt down the guilty man, no matter who he might be. He swore an oath, calling down curses upon the unknown murderer, vowing that exile or death would be his fate. The people, moved by their king's resolve, placed their trust in him once more. But as Oedipus spoke, destiny listened. The man he sought, the cause of the plague, was none other than himself. In his zeal to destroy the guilty, he had unknowingly sworn doom upon his own head. When Oedipus stood before the altar, his voice echoing across the square of Thebes, he called down curses upon the unknown murderer of Laius, declaring that the guilty man would be driven into exile, cut off from home, temple, and fellowship with men. The people listened, hushed, and fearful, for never had a king spoken with such fire. Oedipus's pride swelled. He believed himself chosen by the gods to purge this evil. His words rang with conviction, but behind them lurked the irony of destiny. The very man he cursed was himself. He summoned priests, nobles, and prophets to aid him. He commanded all citizens to speak what they knew. No detail was too small, no secret too hidden. The search for Laius's killer had begun. But with each vow he made, Oedipus drew the noose of fate tighter around his neck. His own hand had spilled Laius's blood, yet he swore vengeance upon the killer as if upon a stranger. The gods were silent, but destiny was not. The wheel of truth had begun to turn. To aid his search, Oedipus summoned Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, whose sightless eyes saw deeper than any man's. Tiresias was reluctant to speak, his silence heavy with warning. Oedipus pressed him, demanding truth. At last, the old prophet spoke. "You are the murderer you seek. You are the curse upon Thebes." The words fell like stones, But Oedipus refused to believe them. His pride ignited into fury. He accused Tiresias of plotting against him, of conspiring with Creon to steal the throne. The crowd murmured, torn between awe and fear. Tiresias, unshaken, replied that Oedipus was blind, not in sight, but in soul. You have eyes, yet you do not see. Soon the truth will strip you bare. Rage consumed Oedipus. He dismissed the prophet, refusing to accept a truth too terrible to imagine. Yet the words lingered, echoing in the silence of his heart. The first crack had appeared in Oedipus's certainty. The prophecy had spoken again, but still he would not see. Oedipus burned with fury after Tiresias's words. The prophet had dared accuse him, the savior of Thebes, the solver of the Sphinx's riddle, of murder. In his pride, Oedipus turned his anger upon Creon, his trusted brother. Is this your plot? Oedipus thundered. Do you seek my throne? Have you conspired with the prophet to cast me down? Creon, calm yet wounded, denied the charge. He spoke of loyalty, of duty, of his contentment with the power he already possessed. Yet Oedipus's suspicion only grew. To a proud man, betrayal seemed more believable than guilt. The people of Thebes watched with unease. Their king, once a hero, now raged against his own family. Jocasta entered, troubled by the quarrel, and sought to calm her husband. But the shadow of doubt had already rooted itself in Oedipus's heart. Thus the search for truth turned bitter, poisoned by pride and anger. The more Oedipus resisted, the closer he came to the very truth he sought to deny. Seeking to calm her husband, Jocasta drew Oedipus aside. She urged him not to trust too much in prophecy. The oracles are not infallible, she said gently. They foretold once that Laius would die by the hand of his own son. Yet Laius was slain at a crossroads by strangers, long before such a son could threaten him. Her words were meant to soothe, to dismiss the terror that gripped Oedipus. But instead they planted a seed of unease, a crossroads, strangers. Could it be? Memory stirred within him, of that day long ago when blood stained his hands upon a lonely road. Oedipus masked his fear, yet doubt gnawed at his heart. Could Jocasta's tale and his own memory be one and the same? He clung desperately to hope that they were not, that fate had not already closed its jaws upon him. But fate is cunning, and even comfort may lead to truth. As Oedipus wrestled with his doubts, a messenger arrived from Corinth. The man bore news: King Polybus was dead. At first, grief filled Oedipus. Though he had fled Corinth to avoid harming him, Polybus had been the father he loved. But then relief washed over him. See, he said, the prophecy is broken. I did not kill my father. He has died of natural causes. Yet Jocasta smiled more brightly than Oedipus. Do you not see? She urged. The oracles were false. Nothing is fixed. Cast aside your fears. But the messenger, eager to bring comfort, revealed more than he intended. You need not fear marriage with your mother, either, for you were not born of Polybus and Merope. They adopted you. You are not their blood. The words fell like thunder. Oedipus froze, his relief vanishing. If Polybus was not his father, then the prophecy was not broken. It lived on, unfulfilled. The messenger had spoken kindness, but in truth, he had struck another step toward revelation. The words of the Corinthian messenger echoed in Oedipus' mind. Adopted? Not the true son of Polybus and Merope? Then who was he? Where had he come from? The messenger told his tale. Long ago, he had received a baby from a Theban shepherd, a child marked by wounds upon his ankles. That infant he had carried to Corinth to be raised by Polybus, Theban shepherd. Wounded feet. The pieces stirred within Oedipus's restless mind. Jocasta's face grew pale, her calm shattered. She begged Oedipus to cease his questioning, to let the matter rest. But Oedipus, relentless in his pursuit of truth, refused. "I must know who I am," he declared. His words cut through Jocasta's pleas like iron. The queen turned away, her heart already beginning to see the shape of the truth. She dreaded. The puzzle was nearly solved, and soon the final piece would fall into place. At last, Oedipus summoned the old Theban shepherd, the very man who had once carried him into the wilderness. Trembling with age and fear, the shepherd stood before the king. At first, he resisted, refusing to speak. But Oedipus pressed him with threats and anger, demanding the truth. The messenger confirmed the tale. It was this shepherd who had given the infant to him long ago. Cornered, the old man confessed. The child had been born of Laelus and Jocasta. Ordered to abandon him, he could not bring himself to kill the infant. And so he had given him away. The words crashed upon Oedipus like a storm. His knees shook, his heart pounded, and the world seemed to collapse around him. Jocasta's horror was already plain. She fled before the final words were spoken. The truth was revealed. Oedipus was the son of Laius. He had slain his father at the crossroads, and Jocasta, his wife and queen, was his mother. The prophecy had come true. The words of the shepherd echoed in the silence of the hall. Oedipus staggered back, his breath caught in his chest. Piece by piece, the puzzle had revealed itself, and now the truth stood bare, merciless, undeniable. He was the son of Laius and Jocasta. He was the murderer at the crossroads. He was both son and husband, both child and lover. The prophecy had spoken true, and every effort to escape it had only led him closer to its fulfillment. Oedipus's mind reeled. He remembered the cries of his youth, the whispers of Corinth, the prophecy at Delphi, the quarrel on the road, Jocasta's gentle smile. All threads wove into one tapestry of horror. The king who had saved Thebes now stood, revealed as its curse. His triumphs were ashes, his reign a cruel mockery of fate. He sank to his knees, crying out to the gods, to earth and sky, to all that lived and all that judged. The hero was broken. The man was undone. As the truth spread through the palace, Jocasta fled to her chamber. Her face was pale, her breath ragged, her heart breaking under the weight of what she knew. She was mother and wife. Her womb had carried the children of her own son. The shame was unbearable. She remembered the infant she once wept over, left to die in the wilderness. She remembered the day she welcomed Oedipus as king, never knowing he was the child she had tried to destroy. Fate had been cruel, weaving her life into a nightmare. She cried aloud, begging the gods for release, cursing the oracle that had doomed her. She clutched her garments, tore her hair, and in her despair she sought the only escape left to her. While the palace servants beat upon her door, Jocasta tied the fatal knot and ended her life. The queen of Thebes, noble and proud, perished not at the hands of fate's violence, but by her own grief and shame. Her death would soon be discovered, and with it, the tragedy would reach its darkest hour. Moments later, Oedipus rushed through the corridors of the palace, searching for Jocasta. His heart, though shattered, still sought her presence. He burst into her chamber and froze. There before him hung the lifeless body of the queen, his wife, his mother. The rope bit into her neck, her face pale and still, her final cry silenced forever. A howl tore from Oedipus's chest. He embraced her body, kissed her cold lips, and wept with a grief beyond words. His soul could endure no more. The truth had destroyed him, and Jocasta's death left him utterly alone. His cries echoed through the palace. shaking the walls with sorrow. He had been king, hero, savior, but now he was nothing, a man broken by the truth, a victim of destiny's merciless design. From this moment, his tragedy would take its final, unbearable turn. Oedipus stood before Jocasta's lifeless body, his eyes burning with grief. At last, he saw everything clearly. The veil was gone, and the truth, though unbearable, could no longer be denied. He had fulfilled the prophecy. He had slain his father and wed his mother. The weight of knowledge crushed him. His triumphs, his pride, his defiance, all were dust. He saw not a king, but a cursed man who had brought ruin upon his house, his city, and his soul. The irony of Tiresias's words pierced his heart. He had been blind while he could see, and now, in truth, he saw more than any mortal should. His awakening was not torment. He whispered to Jocasta's still form, begging forgiveness, cursing himself, and calling upon the gods to strip him of sight, of honor, of life itself. For in knowledge there was no peace, only horror. The king of thieves had awoken, but it was to a nightmare without end. Overcome by grief, Oedipus could bear sight no longer. The world, once his kingdom, now mocked him with its cruel clarity. He turned toward Jocasta's body and with trembling hands tore the golden pins from her gown. Raising them high, he drove the sharp metal into his eyes. A cry of agony rang through the palace as blood poured down his face. Again and again he struck until darkness swallowed him forever. The servants screamed in horror, but Oedipus only cried louder. No more shall these eyes behold the shame I have wrought. No more shall I look upon the world I have defiled. Blind in truth, blind in body, I am cursed by the gods and damned by my own hand. The once proud king, who had stood against riddles and fate, now lay broken and blind, a bleeding shadow of the man he had been. Yet in his blindness there was a twisted clarity. He had seen too much, and so he chose never to see again. Word of the tragedy spread swiftly through Thebes. The once proud king, now broken and blind, staggered through the palace, his cries echoing in every chamber. Jocasta was dead, Oedipus mutilated, and the city's heart lay in ruin. The people gathered in the streets, their voices rising in mourning. They had loved Oedipus, he who solved the riddle, he who saved them from the Sphinx. Yet now they saw him as both hero and curse. He had brought salvation, and he had brought plague. Priests lifted their arms to the heavens, pleading for mercy. Mothers wept for their children, and fathers whispered prayers for deliverance. Thebes was no longer a city of triumph, but one of sorrow, and yet, in their grief, the people also felt pity. Oedipus had been a victim of fate as much as they. His fall was not simply punishment, but a warning to all. No man, however great, can escape the will of the gods. Into this chaos stepped Creon, Jocasta's brother, reluctant, sober, and heavy-hearted. He was called to assume power. The throne of Thebes, stained by tragedy, could not remain empty. Creon approached Oedipus, who sat blinded and broken, and spoke with solemnity. "You must surrender your crown. Thebes must endure, and I must guide it." There was no triumph in his voice, no joy in his claim. For Creon knew that ruling Thebes now meant inheriting sorrow. The people looked to him not as a savior, but as a steward of survival. Oedipus bowed his head, defeated. The crown slipped from his hands without resistance. He had no more strength to cling to power. The gods had judged him, and he was king no more. Creon accepted the burden, not with pride, but with the grim knowledge that he must lead a city scarred by fate. In the shadows of the palace, Oedipus's children came to him. Antigone and Ismene, young daughters of both son and mother, clung to their father's robes, weeping. Their small voices trembled as they asked why such sorrow had come upon them. Oedipus embraced them, his blind eyes streaming with tears of blood. He touched their faces gently, memorizing them with his hands. His sons Polynices and Eteocles stood apart, silent and uneasy, their hearts already stirred by ambition. "My daughters," Oedipus whispered, "your lives will be harder than mine, for you will bear the mark of your father's curse. Men will shun you, and fate will weigh upon your names. Yet I love you beyond all measure." The palace echoed with the sobs of innocent children who had inherited not joy, but sorrow. In them, the tragedy of Oedipus would live on, shamed, broken, and blind. Oedipus begged Creon to cast him out of Thebes. "Let me wander," he cried, "for I am no man, but a curse upon this city." The people murmured in pity, but Creon was torn. Thebes was bound by sacred law. The gods had demanded that Laius's murderer be exiled. Yet to banish Oedipus, once their savior, felt like striking a fallen man. But fate allowed no mercy. With heavy heart, Creon decreed that Oedipus must leave Thebes forever. The words cut through the air like a final sentence. Oedipus bowed his head. He accepted his punishment, for he knew no throne, no city, no family could bear the weight of his presence. His destiny was to walk in darkness, guided only by the hand of his faithful daughter, Antigone. Thus, the once great king was cast out, and Thebes turned its eyes away from the man who had saved them, cursed them, and now departed into. At dawn, Oedipus departed Thebes. His body was bent, his eyes hollowed by his own hand, but his spirit clung stubbornly to life. Antigone walked beside him, her small hand guiding his steps along the rocky roads. The gates of Thebes closed behind them. No cheers followed, no mourning procession, only silence, for Thebes was eager to turn the page, to bury its shame in the dust of exile. Oedipus leaned upon his staff, each step echoing his fall from glory. Once he had entered Thebes as a conqueror, crowned in triumph. Now he left as an outcast, blind, despised, forgotten by those who once hailed his name. Yet in this exile began a new journey, one of suffering but also of strange destiny. For though the gods had struck him low, his story was not yet ended. His path would lead to another city, another fate, and a final resting place where his sorrow might at last find peace. Blind, broken, and shamed, Oedipus wandered the roads of Greece. His faithful daughter Antigone led him, guiding his steps with gentle hands. His staff tapped against the earth, each strike echoing his fall from greatness. They passed through villages where whispers followed them. Some pitied the blind old man, others cursed him as accursed of the gods. Children hid, mothers averted their eyes, and men muttered that he carried ruin wherever he walked. But Oedipus endured. His pride was gone, but his spirit clung stubbornly to life. He spoke often to Antigone, blessing her loyalty, cursing his own fate, and praying that one day the gods would grant him rest. Through mountains, valleys, and dusty roads, he wandered, not king, not savior, not hero, but a shadow of a man, searching for a final place where his suffering might end. At last, Oedipus and Antigone came to a quiet place near Athens, a village called Colonus. There lay a sacred grove, lush and silent, where the air itself seemed filled with divine presence. The trees rose high, the ground soft with grass, and birdsong filled the air. Oedipus halted. Though blind, he felt something in the air, a peace, a power, a whisper of destiny. "Here," he said softly, "here is where the gods will end my wandering. Here shall I rest." The villagers of Colonus, seeing the stranger, were wary. This was holy ground, dedicated to the Eumenides, spirits of vengeance. None dared linger here without reverence. Yet Oedipus, feeling the divine pull, sat upon the earth and declared, "This is the place appointed for me." Antigone wept quietly, for she too sensed that her father's long journey was nearing its end. The people of Colonus, fearing the presence of Oedipus, summoned their king, Theseus of Athens, hero and ruler. Strong, noble, and just, Theseus arrived and listened as Antigone pleaded for her father. Oedipus, weary but proud, spoke of his life, his curse, and his long suffering. He asked only for one gift, to remain at Colonus until the gods called him to his end. Theseus, moved by compassion, agreed. "Here you shall find refuge, Oedipus, not as a king, but as a man who has suffered more than any. Athens will not forsake you." The blind old wanderer bowed his head in gratitude. For the first time since his fall, he felt the touch of kindness without judgment. Theseus, unlike others, saw not only his sins, but his humanity. And so, Oedipus found a protector in the last days of his life, but peace was short-lived. Creon, now ruler of Thebes, came to Colonus with guards at his side. He sought to seize Oedipus and drag him back to Thebes, not for mercy, but for power, for prophecy had said that wherever Oedipus was buried, that land would be blessed. Creon demanded the old king return with him, but Oedipus rose in defiance. "You cast me out, Creon. You scorned me, and now you would claim me in death?" "Never." Creon, unmoved, ordered his guards to seize Antigone and Ismene, who had come to join her sister. He sought to break Oedipus's will through the capture of his daughters. But Theseus stood against him, declaring Athens would protect its guest. "You shall not take him," he warned, "for he is under my shield." Thus, a clash of wills began, Creon, cold and cunning, and Theseus, noble and steadfast. The grove of Colonus became a battlefield of words and wills. Creon, cloaked in authority, pressed his demand, while Theseus, shield of Athens, refused to yield. O Oedipus, blind but fierce, spoke with fire. "Creon, you cast me into exile, and now you come to steal my bones as if I were treasure. Know this, I curse you and your house. The gods shall not bless Thebes, for you act without honor." Theseus, moved by Oedipus's plight, declared his protection absolute. With a command, his soldiers surrounded Creon's men, forcing them to release the daughters. The tension broke into cries, as Antigone and Ismene rushed back to their father's side. Creon, humiliated, retreated. His ambition thwarted, his threats empty, he left Colonus in anger. Oedipus, though broken in body, felt a surge of triumph. For once, fate had not crushed him completely. He had found a protector, and he had defied Creon's cruelty. Yet he also knew the end was near. For the gods whispered to him that his final hour approached. Not long after Creon's retreat, another visitor came to Colonus, Polynices, son of Oedipus and Jocasta. Once proud, now exiled from Thebes, Polynices knelt before his blind father. "Father," he begged, "I come not as a ruler, but as a son cast out by his own brother. Eteocles has seized the throne and driven me away. I march now with an army to reclaim what is mine. Mine. Bless me, father, so that victory may be mine." Oedipus sat silent for a time, his blind eyes turned toward the voice of the son who had betrayed him. By neglect, who had not stood by him in his darkest hours. Slowly his face hardened. "You call me father now, when you need me," he thundered. "Yet when I was cast into exile, you gave me no hand, no comfort, no mercy. You are not my son, but a stranger who shares my curse." Polynices wept, but Oedipus's heart was unyielding. The blind king would not give his blessing. As Polynices pressed his plea, Oedipus's fury grew. He raised his voice, filled with the bitterness of betrayal. "Know this, Polyneices," he cried. "You shall never sit upon the throne of Thebes. Your sword will be stained not with glory, but with your brother's blood. For you and Eteocles are alike, greedy, faithless, and cursed. The gods will see you strike one another down, and neither shall rule in peace. This is the fate you have chosen, and it shall be your doom." Polyneices trembled, tears on his face. He rose slowly, knowing his father's words carried the weight of destiny. Yet he turned to Antigone and Ismene, asking them only to give him burial should he fall. With that, he departed, his heart heavy with sorrow, yet driven still to war. The curse of Oedipus hung over him like a sword, and the future of Thebes darkened further. After Polyneices departed, Oedipus grew silent. The fire of his anger dimmed, replaced by a strange calm. He told Antigone and Ismene that the gods had whispered to him. The time of his death was near. He asked them to take his hand and lead him deeper into the sacred grove. Each step seemed guided by an unseen force, as if the earth itself was calling him. The air grew still. Still. Birds ceased their song. Even the leaves seemed to pause in reverence. Oedipus felt a peace he had never known. "Children," he said, "do not grieve. My suffering ends here. The gods have brought me to the place appointed for me. In death I shall find rest." Antigone clung to him, weeping, but Oedipus's voice was steady. He was ready in the heart of the sacred grove. Oedipus halted. He lifted his face toward the unseen heavens and raised his hands in prayer. No thunder struck, no storm broke. Instead, a hush fell upon the world. Those who were present said that the very earth opened gently, as if welcoming him. Oedipus stepped forward, guided by Theseus, and vanished into the earth's embrace. There was no cry, no struggle, no violence. One moment he stood, the next he was gone, taken by the gods in a death unlike any man's. His body was never seen again, but the ground itself was said to have received him. Antigone and Ismene wept, but Theseus stood in awe. He knew that Oedipus, though cursed in life, had found a strange blessing in death. The grove became a place of reverence, for the gods had claimed Oedipus as their own, and so ended the life of Oedipus, the man who sought to defy fate yet fulfilled it at every turn. Born of prophecy, cast out at birth, raised in love yet driven by fear, he had risen as hero, ruled as king, and fallen as cursed. Yet in the end, the gods granted him a death that was not disgrace, but mystery. The people of Colonus remembered him not only as the blind wanderer, but as one touched by divine destiny. Thebes, meanwhile, sank into further sorrow, torn apart by the war of his sons, Polyneices and Eteocles, who slew one another just as their father had foretold. Oedipus's legacy lived on, in Antigone's loyalty, in the curse of his sons, and in the eternal question his story asks of us all. Are we masters of our fate, or only players upon the stage the gods have written? Thus the tragedy of Oedipus, though born in sorrow, endures as a tale not only of doom, but of humanity, of pride, of blindness, of truth, and of the relentless power of destiny